Well, that's interesting. I use different timer setup, and the other timer automatic microphone. The timer I use today does not unmute the microphone. So here we go. Well, good morning, and welcome to Levers and Drivers of Self-Mastery. We're continuing the theme of mental rehearsal. Today's topic is identity, and I'll also talk about removing idiosyncrasies, which can give you immediate progress and also experience what it feels like to have conditioning at the network of neurons level. Now, in fast-changing environments, one of the biggest mistakes that we mind to visualize a clear destination before we've stabilized who we are becoming. When the future is undefined, detailed outcome create pressure instead of progress. This is where identity visualization matters. Identity visualization is not imagining a title or life's perfect scenario. What you may have done if you were in sales or having a business and you're imagining or visualizing getting this big contract and then it works. Maybe you're in sports and you're visualizing an outcome. You're visualizing yourself moving, or maybe visualizing a win. Now, of course, it doesn't always work because there's an opponent, but you've had enough success that you know visualization can work. But this is not that kind of visualization because it's undefined. You don't know what it holds. It's rehearsing its emotional regulation, default responses, the kind of person you are becoming before the external proof appears, which is why I call it identity visualization. In early years, progress is mostly internal. You often feel effort and uncertainty without visible momentum, and that can be misinterpreted as failure when it's actualization. So there is an incubation period that has to happen. I call it the on-ramp, where there's some trial and error, there's some experimenting, there's some put there and seeing what the response is, and really just finding a voice. And you can speed that up. One of the ways of doing speeding up is by going live. Your voice faster if you are using your voice than you will if you're just sitting in a room imagining. And even faster if you're using your voice in a live environment, because tension and forces precision and create some complexity as well as a progression process because you're building on what you've said before. There's usually a period where the is being built. That's what I'm talking about. Habits are forming, emotional recovery is getting faster, and identity is stabilizing. This phase is quiet, especially when others ask, well, what are you going to do? And that's one of the first answers when somebody loses their job or gets laid off or whatever. What are you going to? And it's like you have to have an answer already, and that forces people, and sometimes in a good way, to find something else. But if they have something inside of them their purpose, meaning, and something that's just more powerful, especially in my audience after 50, we're talking about that transformation with purpose. This is creating a life of your design, not something that you've lived. And if you're 50, your life expectancy is not what the table showed, that those tables go from 0 to the end of life, which was about in the late 70s, but it's static. It doesn't adjust for the fact that it already bypassed many of the deaths that happened from 0 to 49. So your life expectancy, if you were early 90s, and that's a big thing, because if you knew at 50 that you'd be alive for the 40 years, why not take on your purpose? Why not go after something you've always wanted to do or strive for? These premature answers can force decisions before clarity is matured, and the next thing that happens, you're back to doing something that's just same old, same old. It's not easy, but when you're working on purpose, it's always enjoyable. The shift is from visualizing the destination, training the programmer to always be the driver. That's what makes identity visualization complex and why it's also misunderstood. When identity and regulation direction becomes clearer and pivots stop feeling like collapses. What once looked like peaks and valleys begins to feel rises and crossings. Identity visualization is how you prepare internally so that when opportunity shows up, authoritatively and unexpectedly, you are ready to recognize it, respond to it, and continue moving forward without losing momentum. Now, A big is using the visualization so that when what you want, when it shows up, it's not perceived as a threat. As I've said many times, the subconscious or network of neurons perceives the unfamiliar as a threat, and that leads to reactive responses. And sometimes those reactive responses are survival reactions. And when you're doing survival reaction based on what worked in the past, maybe a long time ago. I use the example sometimes when I'm talking to particular audiences. There's a survival reaction that motorcycles, when they're faced with a cross traffic obstacle, a cross traffic incident, and they apply the brakes and they straighten that is a survival response. My view is that it comes from sitting in the passenger seat watching a parent drive, and they hit the brakes to avoid a rear end collision, and they storms. And maybe you've done it yourself. As you're driving, you press the brake. I say slam on the brakes. You slam on the brakes and you straighten your arms, bracing for the impact, which is probably not the best thing to do, right? You want to have some flexibility, but that's what people do because it's a learned behavior. When you do that on the motorcycle, you remove all your options. The motorcycle has the ability to quickly brake, release, swerve behind that crossing vehicle because where that vehicle was is clear. That's just an example of how a action could be the exact wrong thing to do in a particular situation. And we have those across. So whether a person like acts out or withdraws, these are all survival reactions that worked at some point in the future and got locked into our behavior patterns. I'm going to first look at something because a big part of this thing, regulation. And in regulation, I don't being regulated. Let me move this. When I talk about being regulated, and it comes in step 2. So if you think reset, you have 1 is your development. Step 2 is making sure you're regulated. That's step 2. So we're to draw a line to illustrate this. So we have a stimulus response, and then we have a period of time. Remember, if you're doing 30,000 stimulus response cycles a day and you're awake about 65,000 seconds, a second you're having a stimulus response cycle. And some of these are going to be threats, some of them are going to be survival reactions. The thing is, you don't have a lot of calm. This is why meditating, and for any hobby, whether it's painting landscapes, some people like to knit, some people like just getting out and hiking. Hiking is a great one because you're constantly seeing new scenery and you're challenged and you're having to, and your subconscious actually gets preoccupied with, and I'm not talking just walking along a path. I mean something with a few scrambles or maybe some streams you have to cross or some logs you have to navigate. The subconscious gets on for just looking for danger. I ride a one wheel to improve my snowboarding, and I notice on the one wheel I can ride, if I ride that thing for 15 or 20 minutes, I'm in like constant calm because it's so easy to hit a bump and then nosedive, which is pretty painful. The subconscious is totally occupied when I'm riding the one wheel, looking for these pitfalls. Same when I'm riding twisties on the motorcycle. You have turns, especially new roads that you're not familiar with. You're trying to figure out, is this what's the camber? Is it increasing or decreasing radius? It's blind. Which way are the trees going? Let's turn to the left or to the right. You're so busy looking at everything that there's no chatter. So a lot of times these, in between these stimulus cycles, if this is external, let's say this is external and this one is external. A lot of times this could be internal and and this could be internal. So you talked about it earlier, where you have this internal catastrophization, and inside we kind of cycle up really quick because we're adding on. And what happens if that happens? Oh, that's going to lead to that. And people start stacking things that they can't even happen all at the same time because they're different, but they take you 5 potential outcomes and stacked all of them together when there can only be one outcome of this particular thing. So by doing these get rid of the internal stimulus. And the other thing that happens is you have fewer of these because you're writing in your fist, so you're not interacting. Same with meditating. If you just meditate for an hour, that's a portion fewer of the 30 stimulus response cycles you're going to have a day. You take off 2,500 just for meditating an hour. I'm just using that as an example. But let's say we have this, and I'm going to do let's say you have this, if I zoom out, right, it keeps going. So you have this thing that goes on. When a person talks about being regulated, and you think about each one of these, whether they're internal or external, they keep picking you up. You keep going up. Heightened emotion, heightened energy, heightened risk, fight or flight, that keeps just going up. If you just looked at this at face value, regulation somehow means suppressing this, or maybe ignoring it, or coming up with a way. I've even used the terminology, the way where this stuff doesn't be you. But that's only part of it. The other bit is this. Let's take one of these nodes and look at what's going on in between it. So this would be regulated. This would be dysregulated. And then you arrive at that next stimulus, and you're already heightened. You're already closed in. You already have less capacity available. And something else happens, and boom, you're up again. Here's what we're talking about. Here's what I'm talking about when I say regulated. Instead of we have a modified reaction, which leads to a response. And so you're already going closer to, I don't want to say homeostasis, but calm presence, mindfulness. But let's say that it does go this way. Let's say it gets through, and it's an emotional modulation. Sometimes things get through anyway. The objective is to recover quickly. That's what it is. So it's not like you avoid fight or flight. It's that the little might that happen, you're just recovering. You're recovering very quickly. So let's put this in perspective. Remember, we have a neuron side, it's the neural side, and we have a conscious mind side. The network of neurons side processes at 11 million bits per second. This side processes at 50 per second. So when you have a conditioned, it's happening in milliseconds. Over here, it's happening in seconds and minutes. When we're in at the network of neurons level, we are conditioning the recovery in milliseconds. Very important, because you don't even notice the spikes, the mini spikes, because you're recovering at the millisecond level. If you wait, try to fix it at the conscious level, this is over here. This is choices and decisions. This is associations and reactions. Very fast. So what we're really talking about is, by staying regulated, you're doing a series of recoveries. Just like applying across the country, it's off course some large percentage of the time because it's constantly adjusting. Here's a perfect example. To teach performance driving on the track for the Porsche Club. It was a volunteer position. It's fun meeting new people, and you're sitting in the passenger seat as this first time on the track, and you don't know what's coming. Talk about some adrenaline rushes and Some guys used to get nauseous from it because the guys were so wild. But anyway, speed comes with being smooth. There's a, they say get smooth first and then you get fast. If you had speed before being smooth, fast. If you've ever done those go-kart tracks, you'll notice the person who's driving and getting squealy tires, they're slower. The one whose tires are not squealing, all things being equal, they're going to be. What's happening is on a track, and I'm using this example. You may have never driven on a track before, but you've probably driven in snow. You may have driven in the rain. It even happens on a bicycle if you're going around a turn and that turn is wet. Sometimes you're on a nice dry road, but it's early in the morning and trees. Some of these turns may be damp, and you go into this turn and you feel the bike sliding, and you're sliding across, and you are literally managing real time. If you turn too much, you're going to fall. So you're sort of like just relaxing it a little bit, letting the turn get wider. But if you go too wide, you'll be in oncoming traffic. It's a really intense situation. If you've ever done it, you know that moment. You can remember because all your faculties were focused on that. So if you take a turn, in track driving is to lengthen the next straightaway. You want this next straightaway to be long as possible. And so the lines tend to favor getting on the gas here and here. So if you take a line, if a person takes a line, looks something like this. If they go in too deep and they take a line that looks like this, and then they try to turn here, which is a line that you would use if it was the straightaway was over here. You're trying to lengthen this straight, but they're not going to be able to get on the gas until somewhere around here. If you take a line that looks like this and then you cut across the 8, you're going to be able to get on the gas here, and then you're tracking out as you use up the entire roadway. A lot of times what people will do is cheat. They'll come in here and then they really can't get on the gas until over here. That's the better extreme example. So you extremes for how people actually drive. Let's do this again. You have on the one hand what seems to make sense to do this, and that is a line, by the way. But if it's a tight turn, you're not going to be able to get on the gas until over here fully. Whereas if you do the good line, the fast line, you're going to come in, you're going to make your turn late, cut across the apex, you'll be able to get on the gas here because you're basically straightening this out. But you're still turning because the momentum from here is pushing you that way. So what happens if you watch the race car, it looks like just a smooth line. It's a Formula One race or IndyCar race where they have the road course, the turns. The cars look like they're flying around smooth, but when you look at the inside, the guy's doing this with the wheel. I can't. He's doing like this constantly. It's like these little movements. Oh, what he's doing is feeling the tire tearing. So a skid mark, when a tire skids, it leaves a black mark. That black is the tire literally leaving some of it itself in the road. That's where you get the traction. The maximum amount of traction comes where the tire is tearing. And so they're bound. The fastest people on track are sliding almost the entire time. They're constantly sliding and they're adjusting just that balance, because if they go too fast, they're going to go outside, and if they turn too sharp, they're going to go outside because they're going to slide, and if they're going to be slow. So that constant balance. And this is what I'm describing when I talk about these micro recoveries. The same way that when you have a threat, you want to go into this more recovery mode on the network of neurons side, because the network of neurons side is at 11 bits per second. And so when recovery is happening at 11 million bits per second, you don't even notice it. To everybody, it's like just total calm, but you're actually doing recoveries. Now, here's back to this drawing. If you think about this drawing that I did up, in the beginning and you have a stressor that happens here, in the beginning, it may take X amount of time before you can recover. But then you get back to this presence. And that's that, right? Practice. You will reduce this. First, it depends on which one, either one could come first. I've seen it first, but the first thing you want to do is, you want to first reduce the frequency. You want to reduce the frequency. You also want to reduce the duration. And you want to reduce the amplitude. So if you have this, you got this recovery and stimulus responses, and when you get triggered, you're going to have a spike. Now, what we're talking about is recovering fast. In the beginning, it may take a matter of minutes or hours to recover. This thing may continue going, and if it's continuing going and you're looking inside, this just gets greater and greater and greater. This thing, a trajectory that goes like this, even though there's only one stimulus, the rest of the triggers, as I've described before, come from inside before it is showed that where they get stacked. And what we're going to do then is going to reduce the frequency. And we do that with things like emotional modulation. We do it with the positivity exercise, so you're just not going to get triggered. We do it to regulation before the next stimulus. We do it with breathing. We do it with having and a passion, so you in a cone of focus where you can disregard other things. All of that comes together to reduce the frequency. I don't want stimulus response cycles a day. I want somewhere around 10,000, if that. And I want them to be more aligned with what I'm focusing on. In fact, I probably have even fewer than that on my good days, because I'm focusing what I want to focus on. So most of my stimuli, they're coming from self-created. The next thing we're going to do is reduce the duration. And by working on these two, the person is going to be regulated more often. And this is why I was trying to tripping over the which comes first, because they're all interdependent, but then you reduce the amplitude. It happens automatically until it doesn't. So I've watched a person get all this right and everything's going fine. Not the reason, but one of the reasons I added forgiveness as one of the pillars, because I've seen people get all this right and they're doing so much more. They're way more than what they ever would have imagined. They're 10xing, they're moving, and then something happens, and that leads to something else. They get dysregulated, and next thing you know, having a major meltdown. Meltdown has to do with unresolved, I'll call it, trauma. This is not mental health, but unresolved that spikes up, and it's like a phobia response where they're out of control. And so when I map that back to when it goes off, and it has to do with some kind of angst from a relationship, and a lot of times childhood. And I want to make the parallel to phobias. The way a person can get a phobia that, gee, if I jump in panic, then I'll get saved. And that becomes the default when somebody sees this snake, spider, or falls in a pool. They panic because that's what saved them. Well, panic didn't save them. They were panicking and somebody saved them. But their nervous system locked up that panicking is how you get saved. So the same thing can happen with the relationship. A person gets hurt and they panic and cry and do all this stuff, and then they get comforted. Their nervous system locks in that, oh, if I'm hurt emotionally, this is what I can do. And then you see that stuff acting out. So by putting in the forgiveness step, it sort of cuts off one of the avenues for that kind of triggering. So that was a lot. Now, the next thing I want to do is what I was talking about. So we have two ways of looking at this. I used to subscribe to the notion that life is a lot of peaks, and you even talk about it. When you're at this peak, you can see this one, but you can't see the next one that's way over here because this one is blocking. And so you go down there, and then you see this peak. Oh, there's another peak, and then so on and so on. And so this becomes kind of daunting. It becomes, and I don't want to go on any more peaks. I'm tired of the valleys. Then I evolved to more of a view like this. Because of the recovery, you don't have the valley, which is true. I still maintain that. You're recovering, so you don't valley. These are pivots that you don't lose momentum. I was talking about the purpose and the cone of focus. You have about 60 degrees there, and that's enough you can pivot and maintain most of your momentum because you're not, you're not like 180 degrees, you're turning 180 degrees. That would be a flat out turn. Whereas pivoting, you can keep your momentum. Think about a bicycle. If you're turning less than 30 degrees, you can maintain your momentum. Once you get into more like 45 degrees, now you have to slow down a little bit. And 90 degrees, you have to slow down a lot. So that's when you're able to do this. And if you just think about it a little bit, when I was talking about the race car driver adjusting, instead of going down here, you're adjusting. So you go from where it was peaks and valleys. This is rises and plains. And that's part of it because your strategy is not always going to work forever. The pandemic happened, that changes things. You have artificial intelligence, you're going to have robots, all these things change things. So you have to adjust, you pivot, and this is just natural. But there's also transformation, and this brings the two together. And in transformation, you do have this kind of a valley thing, but I don't like a valley and a peak. I think of it as like building a foundation. So you're going to build a building, which is your purpose and your quest. You're going to have, and this foundation is hard, slow, and it takes time. But once you build a foundation, you can then build on top of it. I forgot the exact data, but it said a bamboo tree grows for like the first 6 or 7 years. It's just ground. You don't see anything, and then it shoots up, and it can be like that when you're going after a purpose and you're doing all this inner work. This is that first valley. But the point is, yeah, the first valley is necessary, but after that, you can go into rises and plains. You don't have to go because you're regulated. This would be a homeostasis view. You're not regulated. Every new thing throws you off center, and you got to work to get back. When you're regulated, just become pivots and adjustments. I also think in experiencing it, it's sort of like playing Tetris, but you're the game. You're not Tetris. The player is trying to keep this wall from being built. And they're moving the pieces around, and the game is speeding up, and they're moving pieces around. Sometimes they can collapse 4, 5, 6 lines at a time, and they're making progress. But eventually the game speeds up to the point where it's faster than the player. The wall just gets built. That's how it feels, but you're the game. So you're building this foundation. There's no results. People are saying, hey, have you found a job yet? Have you figured out what you're doing yet? Hey, what are you doing? How's it going? And you say, I'm working through it. I'm working through it. That Those are layers that you don't see, right? The play those layers. The player might they're winning, but the game knows it's going to win, and that's what you have to be. You have to be the game. You're the house. Eventually, it's going to build. It's not over until you decide that it's over. And that's the view I want to have: is you take this time to build a foundation and build a foundation. This is your identity. This is what we're talking about when we say identity. You have to create the identity. You have to create the identity that's right for this quest. And that's what I talk about. So that is aligned with my 7 series. Some series: mental, physical, spirit, emotional. This is the identity. It says here at the bottom, be and do. You have to have the be. This you control mental, physical, inner work, and then you have the emotional. This is the do, because the emotional is the gateway to the right side, which is what you want. Your quest and purpose live over here because they involve other people. You're not in 100% control of the outcome, but you are in control of being regulated. So once you over here, it's easy to be regulated because you're doing all the work. It's only you. When you start being in other people, this is where you find chinks in armor. When those chinks happen, it's not about suppressing it. It's about recovering fast enough so you don't see fight or flight. You get to focus and engage. It's not that there's not stressors. The stressors happen, but your response, your reaction is not fight or flight. Your reaction is focusing because things are happening at the millisecond level. So this is what I'm describing when I said build a foundation. We're doing laps around here to build a foundation. Once you have the foundation, then you can start moving through for the rest and the purpose. And the reason I have a 12-month follow-up with monthly group coaching after a transformation work is because you're going to have some surprises. You're going to have some things come up that you've never dealt with before, and they're going to shock you. And we can't, because part of it is the fears and inhibitions that you may have formed and had as a child and have covered them up all the time. We don't know what those are going to be, but what I will assure you, do this work, you'll have skills to handle them, and eventually you'll build a belief that says, yes, it's going to be hard, it'll be difficult, but I will prevail. And then once you have, that's when the recovery really starts happening faster, because you're expecting it, you're already anticipating it, and you go straight to focus. Then we have it's aligned with emotional intelligence. You can't have good social awareness and good relationship management if you're not regulated. Regulation is going to influence the environment, and so you're not really looking at apples to apples. You're looking at an influenced environment because they're reacting. You've had before where somebody's hurt, but the way they come out at you, it's like they're attacking you, and if you respond to that as an attack versus them being hurt, then it escalates, and then they apologize that it was all coming out because they were so scared of something that was totally unrelated. This is again why I have forgiveness as one of the pillars. There's the 7-step reset. So we're just talking about step 2, where you're being regulated. And once you and being regulated is really about recovering so fast. That's where this comes in, because recovering, and you're not trying to suppress it. You're not trying to change the construct, your level with the rapid recovery. So I was already talking about the network of neuron side versus the conscious mind side. Over here, it's happening in the milliseconds. And this is where we condition in these steps. Remember, this is all inside reaction time. This you're not aware of, this you're not aware of, and this you're not aware of. Time. The stimulus is here. You might be aware of your pre-listening, what you're predisposed to. Are you looking for something that's scary, or you're looking for something that's fun, right? That's your pre-listening. But then when the stimulus, you're not even subconsciously actively processing it, because it's being processed in the background with initial detection appraisal, and then the reaction time, quarter second, happens here, and then the conscious mind reaction time happens in half a second. So all of the work is done here, which is why the recovery is not visible. It's happening at the millisecond level, which is where this is functioning, and you're observing it through the conscious mind level, 50 bits per second. here's the steps for identity visualization. When the future is undefined, identity before destination, visualize traits, not job titles. So one of the things you could think about doing is visualizing what do I look like in the future. You can imagine yourself off into the distance, standing in front of a building, in front of a crowd talking, or maybe you're on an airplane thinking, whatever it is, some symbol. Joe Dispenza talks about using like your initial symbol, but you want some kind of representation that is going to provide the stability while you're doing the inner work. You need to carry this during the foundation building. You're not going to be able to visualize that you're not going to visualize a service you're providing because you don't know what it is yet. You're going through the trial and error, the iterative development. But this symbolization or I should say, symbolizes the outcome where you are going. The rehearse responses, not outcomes, and then focus on emulation. Small actions create clarity. Direction emerges through motion. And I'm going to stop here because and take a slight detour here. I want to introduce this pattern, and that was one that, on the setup for this. I talked about idiosyncrasies as well as the identity visualization, and the idiosyncrasies come about and solve them to meet our quest, because there are little things that we do that are going to stop us. You know, have a habit of biting nails in public, or you may have a habit of saying or you might say you know a lot or something like that, or you may have a habit of withdrawing at key critical times. So those are learned behaviors, and I'm not talking anything heavy. I'm talking minor stuff. So for me, there was a time when I first started going live, I noticed I had a lot of breath noise on the recordings, like this. And it's because I was in through my nose. I had to teach myself to breathe through my mouth. So I would take a breath through my mouth, and then you don't hear it. You only hear it when I breathe through my nose. But if I breathe through my mouth, while I'm talking, you don't hear it. And I had to teach myself to do that. That was an example of an idiocy. Another one I'm working on is I often say so, because I'll go through a thought process, a tangent, and come back and I'll say so. But it doesn't really fit, especially if I'm editing. I might take out the tangent. I have a so, and it doesn't really make sense. So there it is. There's a so. And what you can do is I can imagine myself. So I can imagine when that, because I know when it happens. It happens when I'm coming back from a tangent. And what I'll do is imagine myself saying so. That'll be a picture of me looking through my eyes at the screen or the camera. And then I quickly blow that another picture of a great finished product, a great finished talk, or maybe a ovation if I'm talking to an audience. And I'll do that 3 or 4 times. That's called the swish pattern. And then when you do it, say whoosh, that's the swish part. To do it with ums, you imagine the person imagine going to say or a fill word or something like that. And as it's getting ready to come out, boom, and you go swish, and you imagine the standing ovation, or maybe you go back to that symbol, right? You use the symbol of the sitting on an airplane, looking at a report, or sitting on a plane thinking about your next move, or whatever it is, whatever that symbol that you used of yourself, maybe standing in front of an audience, maybe standing in front of a building, whatever it is, walking down in Manhattan, going to that symbol is for you. You can flash onto that. So you're about to say so, and you say you do that 4 or 5 times. The thing that'll happen is you will notice the awareness. After you do it 5 times, you'll notice awareness. And I do recommend doing it a few days, 5 times a day for a few days, because the first thing that'll happen is you'll recognize the awareness. You'll become aware of it. And this is what I talk about, but you still have to go. And so we teach how to have where you pivot of going from awareness to action. You have to be willing to go through the door. You have to have the courage to go through the fear of it is not enough. So to help you with that, what we'll do is you can read out loud a statement, just the slide. Visualize traits, not job titles. Rehearse responses, not outcomes. And then you could read the thing with inflection. Visualize traits, not jobs. Rehearse responses, not outcomes. And then you read pauses. Visualize traits, not job titles. Responses, not outcomes. Now, I'm not telling a person to pause that much in those lengths, but what we're doing is teaching to pause instead of saying It's not enough to just get rid of You have walking through the door in this case means pausing. So you're aware that you're about to say and then people make the choice and still see I see it because I'm with the client and I'll see it week to week that they go from noticing it, then I said right? That'll be a phase. And the next thing you know, they're shaking their head or doing something, and you know that they're stopping the and 5 weeks in, there's no and that's the thing. So that's let's say I think I was on focus on emotional regulation. Small actions create clarity, and this is why I stopped and did the swish pattern, the idiosyncrasies, because I want you to do that with whatever idiosyncrasies you have, so you can have the experience of realizing that you can do conditioning at the subconscious level. A lot of people think that's impossible, but this will give you enough confidence that, this can really work. Now, it doesn't work on everything. It works best on idiosyncrasies. It works best on my stuff because there's not many things connected to it. For example, are good because it's kind of contained. The breathing in through my nose while I'm speaking or not through my nose while I'm speaking is very contained. It's not connected to other things. For example, it probably wouldn't work on a phobia because there's too many things connected to phobia. Every time you run that path, there's other things that get connected to it, and there's other neurons that fire together, wire together, so they're all involved. So something heavy is not going to be good, but it does work on the lips, and that should give you some confidence that you can change the personality that gets presented, because the personality that gets presented is a construct, and that construct is elements that are happening at the network of neurons level. Then we have managing internal urgency. So one of the things that happens is people often will say, well, what are you going to do? And have you figured it out yet? And this is people to back down. They feel like I have an answer. I'm behind, and it creates urgency and another opportunity for dysregulation. So early clarity is internal, not external. It's not going to show. It's like you're building the foundation. You just got to, we're working through it, working on the foundation. Just have some line that's ready to come out. So you don't go through that phase of, oh my gosh, people think I'm a loser. Pressure can rush premature decisions, as I've said. Exploration needs psychological space. That foundation building, because it's iterative, and in the iterative stage, you have to be able to learn, and it's harder to learn when you're under stress. The same way that cells have a protective configuration and a nutrient configuration. It's either one or the other. So when your internal environment is creating a stressful, toxic environment, the cells can close down active. They can't seek nutrients. This is why probably why illnesses occur. This is why genetics is a thing. And what we want to do are seeking nutrients all the time. Same thing with us. If we are in protective mode, we're not in a growth and learning mode. So you've got to have a way to stay open. And when you're building the foundation, you don't need that stress from what are you going to do. Exploration needs the psych base is the point there. Short answers protect momentum. Just quick short answers and keep going, right? I'm working through it is a valid response. And then the invisible growth. Internal change before external proof. That's the identity piece. That's why this is important. High effort, low visible results. Deal with that. Have to be ready for it. And that's why you have that future symbol that keeps you going. It provides the stability while you're doing the building. Identity and habits are reorganized. This is happening internally. This is learning to recover. It's learning to be regulated. Comparison distorts perceptions. You don't want to look at other people. This is why a lot of your gurus don't use social media, don't be social media. But when you learn to regulate by recovering quickly, a lot of that stuff doesn't matter because you recover, you impact you. I think that a lot of the best practices that you hear from gurus tends to be the very beginning of project phase when they're creating the transformation, then in the middle of it when they're developing and building on the transformation, and then the operational phase. There's different rituals for each of those, or two at some point in the future, because it's a big part of it. Early metrics equal stability, not income. So you're not going to see the income necessarily. And I have seen who make big money on the revenue side, but when you look beneath this happened a lot. You saw a lot of this happen in the pandemic, and also the 2008 financial. A lot of this money's on the revenue side. They're coming in because they've done it with ads. They're making just a little bit of money on the advertising, and they're so focused on more money. The advertisers are encouraging it. You know, the whoever's they're working with may be encouraging it to because the revenue looks so good. But then eventually it's going to break, and when it breaks, you're still paying that ad money for a month or two, right? Because it has a tail to it, and the revenue stops. And when the early warning is coming in, people just keep doubling down and they just keep throwing money at ads. This is how you can get all this money, but there's no. So early metrics in the beginning, it's about stability, not income. And then momentum appears after consolidation. And just that little swish pattern, I've noticed 2 or 3 times. I said, so I'm aware of it. Now I have to, that next stage is with a pause. And maybe I'll come up with a different transition word. Build once, foundation versus pivot. I talked about the pivoting, you don't lose momentum. Once, that's the foundation. Pivot many times. That's the rises to the plains, rises to the plains. First reinvention equals heavy groundwork. It's hard, I get it. Transform is hard, which is why I do it over 9 days. And I have a 12-month group coaching follow-up with a few more one-on-ones just to keep them. And once they have a year under their belt, they move forward. It's also why I don't like to start working with somebody until they have a quest that scares them. We need something that's 3 to 10x of what they think is possible, because I've got to start right off the bat with teaching them how to recover quickly and make that a habit. Once it becomes a habit at the network of neurons level, you're well on your way. Recovery speed replaces collapse. So this is what I'm saying. Your recovery so fast you don't collapse. Peaks and valleys versus rises. We talked about that, and the ability to create sustainable acceleration. So this is a quick thing. Deep practice. You're rewiring your behavior. I would say identity visualization. While you're not going to see it under the umbrella of deep practice, it is a form of deep practice because you're going to apply it. You're going to use it during. You're going to use visualization or visualization during your meditation. You can use it during your morning breathing exercises. You can use it when you're out on hikes or whatever. So why certain behaviors don't change without the inner work? They're emotionally charged. They're context specific, and they've been reinforced for years. So because of homeostasis, the brain is always looking to stabilize, and that's going to create this, oh, it's just like that. And next thing you know, thing is the same, and neurons are fired together. The critical insight is more repetition alone doesn't rewire it. You need precision and constraint, more so than volume. It makes it context specific, intentional, important, precise, complex, struggle at the edge of ability, and that's when you get the myelin on them, and that makes them the path of least resistance. So this is the same thing there. I said so again. This is the same thing with transformation. You have the ongoing, you have to cross this barrier, which can be tough because you have the story, habit patterns, experiences, good experiences, getting cheated, getting bullied, whatever, things that other people said, parents. This comes up with associations as you're crossing this. This barrier is a lot of cognitive dissonance while you're working to get to the other side. Then when you get to the other side, you have a new problem dealing with the unknown, which is why we want to have the regulation done. We want to have being regulated down pat before you cross the side, because there's so many unknowns. If you're susceptible to that, you'll be freaking out all the time. And here we have your the daily events. So I am finishing up the daily events in January, which was self-mastery. In February, we'll move to leading, and I start with one-to-one. Even though you may have a team, you're still leading one first. Before it becomes a team, you're leading one-to-one 12 times in that example. We'll do the executive development with one-to-many, and that's where you set the climate and create the culture. And I am doing a workshop, Wealth, the 4 pillars of mastery. It takes this teaching, but we're going to do exercises. We'll go deeper on the levers and drivers, and we do the 4 pillars. So we're roughly an hour on the content, examples, exercises, practices, and then we spend time working on your own. And it's a proxy for purpose if you don't have a purpose. We'll come up with the proxy, and that's the on-ramp. We'll be building the on-ramp in the workshop. And so as we work through each of the pillars, we're going to use your specific quest. So that's it. And you can put the link in the comments, and 7steptransformation.com/selfmastery-2. There you go. We'll see you next.